Why does the world in Goblin Slayer rely too heavily on a single individual? The phenomenon of dependence on a single individual in the world of Goblin Slayer cannot be reduced to a simple narrative convenience. It is the result of a systemic structure that unintentionally produces a vacuum in the distribution of collective responsibility. On the surface, this world possesses functional institutions, adventure guilds, local authorities, and a seemingly organized social hierarchy. However, in practice, there is a fundamental failure in how threats are prioritized. Goblins categorized as low-level enemies are consistently underestimated and therefore excluded from strategic attention. Within this framework, Goblin Slayer does not emerge as a design solution, but rather as a byproduct of systemic failure. He is not a hero shaped by the system, but one created in response to its negligence. When the majority of adventurers avoid goblin extermination quests due to low economic value and lack of prestige, an informal monopoly over that responsibility is formed. This dependency is not built on absolute superiority, but on the absence of equal participation. Furthermore, the guild structure within Goblin Slayer reinforces this bias through its incentive mechanisms. Ranking systems and reward structures push adventurers toward high-return missions, both financially and reputationally. Under these conditions, goblins are never prioritized because they are seen as inefficient targets. What is overlooked, however, is the cumulative nature of the goblin threat. Individually, they pose minimal danger, but over time and in large numbers, they become significantly destructive. This reflects a gap between perceived threat and actual impact. Existing institutions tend to focus on large-scale, spectacular dangers, while persistent low-level threats receive minimal attention. As a result, social damage accumulates gradually, particularly in peripheral regions that lack direct protection from elite adventurers or military forces. In this context, Goblin Slayer operates under a fundamentally different paradigm. He is not bound by the same incentive logic. His focus is not economic efficiency, but total eradication of a specific threat. This approach may appear extreme, yet it is precisely what makes it effective against a problem the system continuously ignores. His deep understanding of goblin behavior, reproduction, and tactics sets him apart from others who dismiss such knowledge as trivial. The dependency intensifies due to the absence of institutional mechanisms to replicate his methods. His experience and expertise are not integrated into a broader system. There is no formal effort to standardize his strategies or to train other adventurers to achieve similar competence. In essence, the system fails to transfer critical knowledge. There is also a social dimension that exacerbates the issue. Civilian populations in the world of Goblin Slayer are largely passive. Rural villages, which are the most frequent targets of goblin attacks, lack the capacity to establish independent defenses. Their reliance on guilds and adventurers creates an imbalance, where their survival depends on external decisions driven more by economic incentives than by urgency or humanitarian concern. From a systemic perspective, this situation reflects a failure in the distribution of both resources and attention. The world does not lack combat power. There are numerous high-ranking adventurers whose abilities far exceed those of Goblin Slayer. However, that power is not directed toward the most persistent problems. This indicates that the issue lies not in capability but in prioritization. Reliance on a single individual also introduces structural vulnerability. A resilient system requires redundancy, the ability to function even when one component is removed. In this case, if Goblin Slayer were to disappear, there is no guarantee that the goblin threat would continue to be managed effectively. This highlights a lack of long-term sustainability within the system. Moreover, this phenomenon can be interpreted as a critique of traditional fantasy structures. Many fantasy narratives emphasize large-scale threats while neglecting smaller, persistent dangers. Goblin Slayer subverts this pattern by demonstrating that minor but consistent threats can have a far greater impact on everyday life. The reliance on a single individual becomes a symbol of collective failure in recognizing and addressing that reality. In conclusion, the world's dependence on one individual in Goblin Slayer is not an idealization of a lone hero, but an exposure of systemic inefficiency. It reveals that power without proper distribution and prioritization cannot produce effective protection. The world does not lack strength, it lacks a system capable of directing that strength in a rational and sustainable manner.